The morning my son sold my car, I woke up to the sound of a text message instead of birds. It was 7:12 a.m., and the light coming through my curtains was that pale gray that makes everything look like it's still thinking about waking up. I reached for my glasses, blinked twice at the screen, and saw a notification from my bank. Deposit of $8,500 received, Used Auto Sales LLC. For a moment, I thought they had the wrong number. Then I looked out my bedroom window and the driveway hit me like a cold slap. The space where my blue 2008 Toyota Camry had slept for years was empty. No car, just a damp rectangle of darker concrete where the tires always rested. My heart didn't race. It sank. There's a difference, you know. One is panic. The other is the feeling you get when you realize something has quietly been taken from you while you were dreaming. I walked to the kitchen, my knees stiff the way they are at 68, and found Mark leaning against the counter, scrolling on his phone with a mug of my coffee in his hand. The good mug, the one with the little blue flowers that my husband Frank bought me at a gas station outside Amarillo in 1983. Mark didn't even look up. "Morning, Mom," he said. "Don't make that face. I did you a favor." I opened the fridge, so I had something to hold on to. "Where's my car, Mark?" He sighed like I'd forgotten something obvious. "You don't drive anymore, Mom. It was just sitting there. The insurance, the registration, all those bills. It doesn't make sense. I sold it. You're welcome, honestly." Have you ever felt something like this? That strange mix of disbelief and humiliation, like you walked into a room where everyone has already decided who you are? He finally looked up at me, like he was bracing for a tantrum from a toddler. "I got a good price," he went on. "Garage guy gave me the receipt and everything. I signed for you. It's done." I set the carton of milk on the counter a little too hard. "You signed for me?" "Yeah," he said, shrugging. "Come on, you know you get confused with paperwork. You said that yourself last time with the internet bill. I know your signature. It's not a big deal." The internet bill. That had been one late payment when I couldn't remember my password for the online portal and sat on the phone with customer service for 45 minutes. I'd made one joke, one tired, self-deprecating joke about being too old for all these apps. Mark had turned it into evidence. Did you ever realize too late that you were being used? I took a slow breath, the way they taught me after Frank died, and my chest felt like it was collapsing every time I looked at his old work boots by the door. "Mark," I said, keeping my voice level, "that car was in my name. The title is in my name. You had no right to sign anything." He rolled his eyes and set the mug down without a coaster. "Mom, you're overreacting. You barely drive to church anymore. I take you to the grocery store. I handle your prescriptions. You should be grateful I'm helping you with this stuff. Plus, I put the money in your account. You saw the text." I had seen it. I also noticed the balance was exactly $4,500 higher than yesterday, not $8,500. I might forget passwords sometimes, but I don't forget numbers, not the important ones. I didn't say anything right away. I just watched my son, my own boy, whose diapers I changed on a floral couch in a little rented house, tap away on my kitchen counter, leaving a ring of coffee under Frank's flowers. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint buzz of the cheap ceiling fan in the living room. The wall calendar by the fridge showed 3 little circles around dates: my pension deposit, the electric bill due date, and my yearly checkup at Dr. Harris's office. I circled them in red every month. It made me feel like I still had a say in what happened to me. I remembered the day I bought that Camry. Frank had already been gone 2 years by then. I'd gone down to the dealership alone, wearing his old denim jacket, and I signed the contract with my own hand. I kept every page of that purchase agreement, in a blue folder labeled car in my file cabinet, right next to house and insurance. People think older women are careless with documents, but that's only the ones who gave up long before anyone noticed. "Who did you sell it to?" I asked. "Used auto sales," he said. "That little lot on Maple, across from the laundromat. Guy's name was Tony. We did it fast. It's fine, Mom. It's done." He spoke like I was some old appliance he'd finally unplugged. I stirred my coffee, which had gone lukewarm. "Why is the deposit less, then?" He blinked. "What?" "The text said 8,500, I replied. "My balance is up by 4,500 since yesterday. Did Tony take a surprise fee?" There, just a simple question. I learned a long time ago, as a secretary in an insurance office in the 70s, that the quiet questions scare people more than the loud ones. Back then, I watched men in suits crumble when I asked, "And where is that in writing, sir?" Mark shifted his weight. "I moved some into my account for the work I did," he said quickly. "Driving it there, handling it. Gas isn't free, you know, and I've been paying your phone bill for months. I figured we'd settle up." There it was. Settle up. Like I was an open tab at some bar he never wanted to be in. I didn't argue then. I knew if I yelled, he'd call it one of your episodes and tell my daughter Lynn that Mom's slipping. They'd had that conversation over my head once at Thanksgiving, whispering in the kitchen while I washed dishes and pretended not to hear. Instead, I went to my bedroom after he left for work, the front door slamming just a little too hard. I slid open the bottom drawer of my old oak dresser, the one with the brass handles, and pulled out my file box. Bills, receipts, contracts, all labeled in my handwriting. I found the folder marked car and opened it on the bed. The original purchase agreement, the title copy, the insurance policy with my name printed clearly. Owner, Margaret Ann Collins. No cosigner, no power of attorney, just me. I picked up my reading glasses and leaned closer, tracing the words with my finger. The pen had pressed deep into the page when I signed. I'd been nervous that day, but proud. You can still see the little groove it left if you hold the paper at an angle. I also found something else. The renewal notice from the DMV, printed 3 months ago, with a little note I'd scribbled on the side during a phone call with Lynn. "Ask about online renewal," it said. I hadn't asked yet. Life got in the way. Grief, plumbing issues, the rising price of groceries. Still, that paper had a date, and dates can be louder than any argument if you know how to use them. I sat back on the bed and listened to the silence of the house. In the faint reflection of the TV screen across from me, I could see myself. Gray hair in a loose bun, lines around my mouth deeper than last year, but eyes still clear. Not confused? Not yet. I thought about all the nights I'd stayed up with feverish kids while Mark's father worked late shifts, the double shifts I took after Frank's cancer came back, just to keep the mortgage paid. The way I'd saved every receipt, every medical bill, every pink slip, because paper tells a story when people start rewriting history. That morning, my son sold my car while I was asleep and told me I didn't drive anymore. But as I tucked those documents back into their folder, something settled into place inside me. It was small and quiet, like the click of a lock on a door. I might not drive much these days. My knees ache on the stairs. I sometimes forget why I walked into a room. But I know how to read a contract. I know my own name on a title. And I know, perhaps better than my own children remember, that under all this gray hair is a woman who once ran an entire office with nothing but a typewriter, a filing cabinet, and a sharp eye for the fine print. I closed the box and slid it back into the drawer. On the nightstand, my old landline phone sat next to my cell. I looked at both of them, thinking of numbers I hadn't dialed in years. Our family lawyer, the DMV office, even the local police station. I wasn't ready to call anyone yet. But for the first time in a long while, I felt something that wasn't resignation. I felt the beginning of a plan, forming slowly, one document at a time. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual, before the sun had fully stretched across the living room floor. The house felt colder than it should have, as if someone had opened a window in the night and forgotten to close it. I wrapped my old blue cardigan tighter around my shoulders and walked to the kitchen, listening to the soft creak of the wood under my slippers. It was strange how the smallest sounds seemed louder when something in your life had gone missing. I made a pot of coffee, the kind Frank used to tease me about. Motor oil, he'd call it, but I liked it strong. While it brewed, I opened the drawer under the microwave and pulled out the little spiral notebook where I kept notes about bills, medical reminders, and phone numbers. My handwriting looked shakier these days, but I could still read every letter. I thumbed through the pages until I found the list of contacts from when Frank and I updated our will years ago. Right under Attorney Harold Brennan was his office number. My hand hovered over the phone. I wasn't ready, not yet, but just knowing the number was there felt like having a hand on my back, steadying me. The kettle clicked and I poured myself a cup. As the steam rose, I caught my reflection in the microwave door, gray hair loose around my face, cardigan slipping from one shoulder, eyes tired but focused. Not fragile, not confused. Tired, yes, but also aware. Have you ever stared at your own reflection and realized you've been letting people treat you as smaller than you actually are? I sat at the kitchen table and went through the bank app on my phone. The transaction details were simple. Used Auto Sales LLC, deposit. There was no record of the remaining 4,000 mark transferred to himself, at least not in that line. But I knew how to look deeper. I clicked through each transaction one by one until I found it, tucked between grocery purchases and a utility payment. Transfer to M. Sir Collins, $4,000. I screenshotted everything and emailed the images to myself, labeling the subject line clearly. Car, bank records. I'd learned years ago that digital proof was just as important as paper. It was a little after 9 when I finally stepped outside. I wanted to see the empty driveway in daylight. The air smelled like damp concrete and early autumn leaves. A neighbor across the street, Mrs. Patterson, stood watering the flowers on her porch. She waved. I waved back, pretending everything was normal. "Where's your Camry, Maggie?" she called. I hesitated. "Gone," I said simply. "For now." She frowned, the kind of frown only older women have mastered. Concern mixed with suspicion. "You need anything?" "No," I replied, but even I could hear the pause before the word. Back inside, I went to my bedroom and opened the file drawer again. The car folder sat right where I'd left it. I pulled out the title copy and slipped it into a plastic sleeve. Then I added the purchase agreement, the insurance policy, and a few service receipts I'd kept. Frank always said, "Keep the papers, one day they'll matter." He was right about many things. Around noon, Mark came home from work early. I heard the door open and close, followed by the sound of him kicking off his shoes. I stayed in the living room, holding the folder in my lap. He walked in, rubbing the back of his neck like he always did when he was about to deliver bad news or soften a blow. "Mom," he started, "I know you're upset, but I really did what was best." I looked up at him slowly. "For whom?" He frowned. "Don't start. I told you, I'm handling things. You shouldn't be stressing about cars or bills or—" "I'm not stressing," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'm thinking." He didn't like that answer. I could see it in the tightness of his jaw. "You know," he said, pacing a little, "Lynn agrees with me. She said you've been forgetting things more lately." "That's interesting," I replied. I don't recall forgetting anything that wasn't worth remembering. He stopped pacing. Mom, come on. I placed the folder gently on the coffee table. Mark, did you sign my name on that receipt at the car lot? I told you, he said. It wasn't a big deal. But you did sign it. He shrugged. Yeah, so what? So, I said softly, that's called forgery. The color left his face just a shade. Tsigini, not much, but enough for me to see it. Mom, don't be dramatic. I leaned back against the couch cushions. I'm not being dramatic. I'm being factual. The room went still. Even the old clock on the wall seemed to quiet down for a moment. I'm helping you, he said finally, his voice tight. You should appreciate that. I appreciate many things, I replied, but not that. He looked at me like he was seeing a stranger. Maybe he was. Maybe he'd gotten used to the version of me who let things slide because I didn't want to burden anyone. That woman had lived inside me for years. She was tired. He grabbed his jacket from the chair. I'll be back later. We'll talk then. When the door closed behind him, I let out a slow breath, the kind you don't realize you've been holding for a long time. I picked up the folder again and ran my fingers over the smooth plastic. I wasn't afraid, not anymore. Something inside me had shifted. I walked to the kitchen, took out a fresh notebook page, and wrote down 3 names: the dealership, the bank, and attorney Harold Brennan. No lists, no numbered steps, just names, just reminders. I folded the paper and slipped it into my purse. For the first time in a long while, I felt like the ground under my feet belonged to me again. That night, I lay awake longer than I wanted to, listening to the soft ticking of the clock on my dresser. Each tick felt like a reminder that time moves on whether we're ready or not. The streetlight outside cast a pale stripe across the ceiling, and the shadows seemed to stretch and breathe with every passing car. I used to sleep deeply, especially when Frank was alive. But after he passed, sleep became something I had to relearn, like walking on a shaky leg. I finally got out of bed a little after 5. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that wraps around you like a heavy coat. I made oatmeal and sat at the table, stirring it slowly as I thought about the folder in my purse. I'd torn the reminder page from my notebook and rewritten it neatly. Just the dealership, the bank, and Harold Brennan. 3 names, 3 anchors. Have you ever had a moment when you realized your life had been tilting in a direction you didn't choose, and suddenly you felt it shifting back into place? That morning, I felt it. By 9 o'clock, I was dressed, hair pinned back, and my good shoes on, low heels, scuffed on the sides, but dependable. I hadn't worn them since Lynn's wedding anniversary last year. I didn't bother telling Mark where I was going. I knew he'd text eventually, but the silence felt strangely comforting. I ordered a ride-share car, something I'd only used twice before. The driver, a young woman with a soft voice, glanced at me in the mirror and asked if I needed help with my seatbelt. I smiled politely and told her I was fine. I don't think she believed me, but she didn't push. The dealership on Maple Street looked even smaller than I remembered. A sagging banner that read, "End of Summer Deals," hung crookedly above the office door. A row of used cars sat in the lot, their windshields dotted with neon price stickers that curled in the sun. The air smelled like hot rubber and old motor oil. Inside, a man with a shiny bald spot and a cheap red tie looked up from his desk. "Morning, ma'am," he said, pushing his glasses up. "What can I do for you?" "My name is Margaret Collins," I said softly. "My son sold my car here 2 days ago." Recognition flickered across his face before he could hide it. "Ah," he said, clearing his throat. "Well, yes, I remember. The blue Camry, right? Good little car." I set my purse down on the counter. "I'd like a copy of the paperwork." His mouth opened, then closed again. "Paperwork?" "Yes," I said, meeting his eyes. The receipt, the contract, anything with my name on it. He shifted in his seat, tapping a pen against his desk. Well, usually we don't print extras unless there's a situation. There is one, I replied gently. He stared at me for a moment. Maybe he expected me to be confused or flustered. I kept my gaze steady. Eventually, he sighed, stood up, and walked into a back room. I could hear papers shuffling and a door creaking. Moments later, he returned with a manila folder. "I'll have to charge a small printing fee," he said. I slid a $5 bill across the counter. "Will this cover it?" He nodded and printed several pages. I watched the ink roll across the paper, the whir of the machine steady and familiar. When he handed them to me, I noticed something immediately, the signature on the seller's line. It wasn't mine. It wasn't even close. "That's not my handwriting," I said calmly. He cleared his throat. "Your son said you asked him to sign for you. He said you weren't feeling well." I felt something warm rise in my chest. Not anger, but a deep, steady certainty. "Did you ask for my ID or authorization? Anything?" He swallowed. "No, ma'am, I didn't." I nodded. "Thank you for your honesty." There was a moment of silence between us. The hum of the old refrigerator in the corner filled the room, and somewhere outside a car alarm chirped twice. Will there be trouble?" he asked nervously. "I don't know yet," I said truthfully, "but I needed these documents." He nodded slowly, looking relieved and uneasy at the same time. I folded the papers carefully and placed them in my purse. As I turned to leave, he called after me. "Ma'am, for what it's worth, I'm sorry." I didn't respond, not because I was angry, but because I didn't quite know what to say to a man who'd helped my son take something from me without even realizing the weight of it. Outside, I stood for a moment in the warm sunlight, feeling it settle on my shoulders. My ride arrived quickly, and I slid into the back seat, clutching my purse the way I used to clutch my kids' backpacks on the first day of school. On the ride home, I pulled out one of the documents. The timestamp on the transaction matched the moment I'd been asleep in my bed, blinds closed, window cracked just enough for the cool air to drift in. While I was dreaming of Frank again, something that still happened from time to time, my son had been forging my name on a piece of paper that said I no longer owned something I had worked for. When I got home, the house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. Mark had been there recently. His shoes were by the door, one slightly overlapping the other, the way he always kicked them off in a hurry. My heart tightened. I went to my room, opened my file drawer, and placed the dealership papers next to the title. The contrast between my real signature and the scribble pretending to be mine was painful to look at. I sat down on the edge of the bed and pressed my hand to my chest. "Frank," I whispered under my breath, "I wish you were here. You always knew what to do." But then, almost as if the memory of him answered, I felt that same quiet strength I used to lean on. It wasn't gone. It was just in me now. A few minutes later, I picked up the phone and dialed the number I had written down first on my reminder page. Attorney Harold Brennan. My hand didn't shake. Not this time. Harold Brennan's office sat on the second floor of an old brick building downtown, the kind with creaky steps and a faint smell of dust and coffee that had been brewing since the Reagan administration. I hadn't seen Harold in years, not since he helped me settle Frank's estate. Back then, he had thinner hair and a softer voice. Now, judging from the secretary who answered the phone and squeezed me in for a morning appointment, I expected time had left its marks on him too. I arrived 10 minutes early. I always do. Old habits from my days at the insurance office. You learn quickly that being early gives you time to breathe before someone tries to take it away. The waiting room felt familiar, in the way all older offices do. Thick, beige carpet, framed certificates on the walls, a faint hum of a copier in the back. I sat down with my purse on my lap, papers neatly organized inside. My fingers brushed the title copy, the screenshots I'd printed, and the dealership paperwork. My heart felt steady, surprisingly steady. When Harold finally came out, wearing a navy suit that wasn't quite as crisp as it used to be, he smiled warmly. "Margaret Collins," he said, extending a hand. "It's good to see you. How are you holding up?" I didn't lie. "I've been better," he nodded, his eyes softening. "Come on in." His office hadn't changed much. The same leather chair, the same desk, the same lamp in the corner shaped like a lighthouse. I always liked that lamp. Something about it felt symbolic. Steady light, steady guidance. Today, it meant more than ever. "So," he said as we sat, "tell me what happened." I opened my purse and placed each document on the desk. The title, the screenshot prints, the dealership copies. I spoke calmly, just the facts. My son selling the car without my consent, his signature that wasn't mine. The missing money, the shift in his tone these past months, the little remarks about my memory, the way my children whispered about me when they thought I wasn't listening. Harold listened without interrupting, his fingers steepled under his chin. When I finished, he leaned forward and gently tapped the forged signature. "This," he said, "is a problem." I nodded, feeling something tighten in my throat. Not fear, validation. "Margaret," he continued, "this is forgery, unauthorized transfer of property, and, depending on how the dealership wants to cooperate, potential fraud. You have every right to take action." A small breath escaped me. "I don't want to destroy my son's life," I said quietly. "I just want mine back." Harold gave me a thoughtful look. "We can approach this in stages. You don't have to make any drastic decisions today, but protecting your rights is not destruction. It's preservation. That car was yours. No one had the authority to say otherwise." His words settled into me like warm tea on a cold morning. He asked if I had any texts from Mark, referencing the sale. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through recent messages. Nothing. He'd been careful. No admissions, no explanations, nothing written. But then I remembered something. "Wait," I said, opening another folder in my photos. "I took a picture of the refrigerator whiteboard a few days before this happened." I handed him the phone. On the screen was a photo of my messy grocery list, and just beneath it, in Mark's blocky handwriting, "Mom doesn't drive anymore. Car just sitting. Something needs to be done." Harold raised an eyebrow. "Interesting." "It's not proof," I said, "but it's something." "It shows intent," he replied, "and intent matters." He took careful notes as we talked. I watched him, remembering the way he guided me through the paperwork when Frank died. How he didn't rush, didn't talk down to me, didn't treat me like a grieving widow who couldn't think straight. He treated me like a person, a capable person. When we finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Here's what I can do. I'll draft a formal letter to the dealership requesting their cooperation and clarifying that you did not authorize the sale. Most respectable businesses will comply when they realize the legal exposure. That will give us leverage." I nodded slowly. "All right." "And," he said gently, "we can prepare a statement for the police if you choose to involve them later. You don't have to file it yet, but having the documents ready gives you control." Control. Such a simple word, but after months, maybe years, of feeling like decisions were being made around me instead of with me, it felt like someone handing me a key. He slid the documents back toward me. "Margaret, you're not alone in this, and you're not confused. You're clear, and that matters." For a moment, I closed my eyes. Have you ever realized that people mistake kindness for weakness? I asked softly. He smiled a little. More often than you'd think. When I left his office, the sky outside had brightened. The city felt louder, the traffic thicker. But inside me, there was a calm I hadn't felt in a long time, a steady rhythm, like a drumbeat under my ribs. As I stepped onto the sidewalk, my phone buzzed, a text from Mark. "Mom, we need to talk when I get home." I stared at the words for a long moment. Then I slipped the phone back into my purse and kept walking, the courthouse clock chiming in the distance like some quiet reminder that time, for once, was on my side. By the time I arrived home that afternoon, the quiet of the house felt heavier than usual, like it was waiting for something to break. Sunlight drifted through the blinds in thin stripes, dust motes floating in and out of the beams like little ghosts. I set my purse on the coffee table and placed the folder neatly beside it. I'd always believed that order helps clear the mind. Not even 5 minutes passed before the front door opened and Mark stepped inside. He always walked with purpose, but today his footsteps were sharper, harder. He stopped when he saw me sitting on the couch, hands folded in my lap. "Mom," he said, closing the door behind him, "we really need to clear the air." I nodded. "Yes," I replied softly. "We do." He dropped his keys onto the counter and leaned his hands against it, his shoulders tense. "Look, I know you're mad, but I did what I had to. You can't keep pretending everything's fine. You forget things. You get confused. You need help, and I'm trying to step up." I kept my voice calm. "I appreciate help, Mark. I don't appreciate decisions being made for me." He paced once, twice, then turned sharply. "You don't even know how many times I've covered for you. Lynn and I talked about this for months. You leave the stove on sometimes. You missed a doctor's appointment last year. You mixed up your blood pressure pills and your vitamins. That was one time," I said quietly, "and I caught it." He seemed frustrated that I didn't argue more. Maybe he expected tears, or guilt, or for me to crumble the way he'd convinced himself I would. "I'm doing what's best for you," he insisted. I looked at him. Really looked at him. My son, 42 years old, with worry lines that hadn't existed 5 years ago, and impatience in his eyes that hadn't existed 15 years ago. Somewhere along the road of life, he'd convinced himself that control was the same thing as care. "You know," I said softly, "there's a difference between helping someone and taking over their life." He opened his mouth, but I continued. "And there's a bigger difference between protecting someone and benefiting from their vulnerability." His face tightened. "What's that supposed to mean?" I reached for the folder. He watched my hands like they were live wires. I pulled out the dealership paperwork and laid it on the table between us. "This is not my signature." He didn't move, didn't breathe, I think. I pulled out the bank printouts. "This transfer wasn't discussed with me." He opened his mouth again, but the words stuck somewhere in his throat. Then, finally, "Mom, you're blowing this out of proportion." I gave him a sad smile. "That's what people say when they've been caught doing something wrong." His jaw clenched. He sat down on the armchair and leaned forward, elbows on his knees, rubbing his temples. "You talked to someone, didn't you?" "I did," I said. "I spoke with Harold Brennan." His head snapped up. "A lawyer? Jesus, Mom!" "I needed clarity," I said simply. He laughed, sharp, humorless. "You're taking legal advice now over a car you weren't even using?" "It wasn't about the car," I said. "It was about the choice." He stared at me, frustration turning into something harder to read. I'd seen that look before, when he was 16 and got caught drinking behind the bowling alley, when he was 25 and maxed out his credit card. It was the look of someone who knew he'd crossed a line but wasn't ready to admit it. Then Unexpectedly, he lunged up from the chair and stormed toward the hallway. "I can't deal with this," he muttered. "I need to lie down." I watched him go. For years I'd followed him, emotionally, silently, trying to smooth the wrinkles he left behind. Today, I let him walk away. I stayed on the couch, listening to the muffled slam of his bedroom door, the house settling afterward like a sigh. A faint breeze came through the window, lifting the lace curtain edges. It carried a scent, fresh-cut grass from the neighbor's lawn. Something about it made my eyes sting. Have you ever noticed how the smallest things remind you of who you used to be? I remembered afternoons when Frank and I washed that blue Camry together, him humming old country songs while I scrubbed the mirrors clean. I remembered driving down to the lake with groceries in the back seat and a paperback novel in my purse. I remembered independence, not grand, heroic independence, but the quiet kind. Choosing your own groceries, your own errands, your own path. Later that evening, I brewed chamomile tea and sat in my recliner. I opened my notebook and wrote down a few observations. Not a list, not steps, just thoughts. Thoughts about dignity, about boundaries, about trust. I wrote for nearly an hour, the pages filling with the kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. Around 9, there was a soft knock on my doorframe. Mark stood there, hands shoved in his pockets, eyes tired. "Mom," he said quietly, "we'll figure this out. I didn't mean to hurt you." Sometimes apologies arrive too early, sometimes too late, and sometimes they arrive in a tone that isn't an apology at all, but a plea for the world to reset itself. I nodded gently. "Good night, Mark." He hesitated, then turned and went back to his room. I could hear him sigh, heavy and defeated. I finished my tea and looked at the folder beside me. The edges of the papers stuck out slightly like they were asking to be seen. I rested my hand on them and felt a calm resolve settle into me. The truth was simple. I wasn't weak. I wasn't confused. I was awake now, and there is nothing more dangerous to someone who takes advantage than a woman who finally wakes up. The next morning began with the soft chime of my phone. Not a message from Mark, as I half expected, but a voicemail notification from an unfamiliar number. I pressed play while standing in the kitchen, the morning light spilling across the counter like watercolor. "Mrs. Collins, this is Officer Ramirez from the Maple Street Precinct. We received a call from Used Auto Sales regarding a concern about a transaction involving your vehicle. Please return my call at your earliest convenience." I set the phone down slowly. The dealership must have acted faster than I imagined. Maybe Harold's letter had reached them already. Or maybe the guilt had sat too heavily on that salesman's shoulders. Either way, it stirred something inside me. A quiet steadiness. A sense that the wheel was turning, and for once, it was turning in my favor. I brewed a cup of morning coffee and sat at the table before calling back. My hands were steady around the warm mug. "Maple Precinct, this is Ramirez." "Yes, hello," I said. "This is Margaret Collins returning your call." His tone softened. "Ah, Mrs. Collins, thank you. We received a report from the dealership about a possible unauthorized sale involving your vehicle. They mentioned your concern. Would you be able to come down to the station today?" "Of course," I said. "What time works best?" "We can see you any time before 4. I hung up and exhaled. There's a strange calm that comes when you know you've stepped into a moment you can't walk away from. Not because it's dramatic or frightening, but because it's necessary. Have you ever felt that? A quiet certainty that something long overdue is finally happening? By noon, I had dressed in my good slacks and a soft pink blouse Frank once said made me look like spring. I left a note for Mark on the table. Nothing emotional, nothing dramatic. Just running errands. Back later. Mom. The ride to the precinct was quiet. Trees along the main road swayed in the wind, leaves flickering like little coins in the sun. I pressed the folder against my side, feeling the edges through the fabric of my purse. Inside the station, everything felt sharper. The click of boots, the murmur of radios, the low hum of fluorescent lights. A young officer led me to a small room with a rectangular table and 2 chairs. It wasn't an interrogation room exactly, but close enough to feel official. Officer Ramirez entered a minute later. He had kind eyes, the tired kind you see on people who've spent too many years balancing strangers' burdens. "Mrs. Collins," he said warmly, "thank you for coming." He sat down across from me. "I understand there may have been a misunderstanding about the sale of your vehicle." I placed my purse on the table and opened the folder. "I believe there was more than a misunderstanding," I said. My voice surprised me. Steady, unwavering. He nodded. "Let's take this slowly. Can you tell me what happened in your own words?" So I did. I told him everything. Waking up to the text, the empty driveway, Mark's tone that morning, the missing money, the forged signature, Harold's advice, the dealership's confession. I spoke quietly, but I didn't soften the truth. Ramirez listened carefully, writing notes in a small pad. Every now and then, he gave a small, affirming nod that reminded me of Dr. Harris when he wanted me to continue. When I slid the dealership paperwork across the table, he examined it closely. "This signature does not match the copy on your title," he said. "And the dealership admitted they didn't verify ID?" "Yes," I said. He sighed. "All right, this is serious. Forgery of this nature is a criminal offense." He paused, then added gently, "even if it involves a family member." I looked down at my hands folded on the table. "I know." He gave me a moment before continuing. "Mrs. Collins, what would you like to see happen? Do you want to press charges?" The clock on the wall ticked 3 times before I answered. "I don't want to punish my son," I said slowly, "but I do want protection, and I want the record to reflect that the sale was not authorized by me." He nodded. "We can proceed with a formal statement. It doesn't commit you to pressing charges yet, but it documents everything. It also gives us authority to communicate with the dealership, your bank, and any involved parties." That word again, authority. Funny how heavy it can feel when it's missing, and how comforting it becomes when someone finally offers it back to you. "I'd like that," I said. He printed a form and slid it toward me. I read every line, every statement, every sentence. My eyes didn't blur, my hands didn't shake. I signed at the bottom with the same signature that lived on my title. When we finished, Ramirez stood and extended his hand. "You've done the right thing, Mrs. Collins. You're not the first person to go through something like this, and you won't go through it alone." The warmth in my chest surprised me. Gratitude mixed with something like grief, but also pride. As I left the station, a cool breeze brushed against my cheeks, carrying the scent of rain in the distance. Storm clouds were gathering just beyond the rooftops. On the steps outside, I paused and looked up at the sky. For a long time, I had let people tell my story for me. My age, my memory, my needs. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone had a version. But today, I'd put my story back into my own hands. When I returned home, Mark's car wasn't in the driveway. The note I'd left was still on the table. I set my purse down gently, took a long breath, and felt the world shifting again. Quiet, subtle, but unmistakable. Sooner or later, he'd come home. And when he did, he would realize something he had forgotten long ago. His mother was not someone who could be quietly erased. Mark came home later than usual that day, long after sunset, long after the house had settled into its quiet, nighttime rhythm. I was sitting in the living room with the lamp on, just one light, warm and soft, the way Frank used to prefer. I heard the jingle of Mark's keys before the door even opened. His steps came slowly, careful in a way that told me he sensed something was different. When he stepped into the living room and saw me, he froze. His eyes flicked to my purse on the coffee table, then back to me. "Mom," he said, voice cautious, "where were you today?" I took a breath. I had an appointment. With who? Officer Ramirez at the Maple Street precinct. It was quiet for one full heartbeat. Then the panic started to rise behind his eyes. He tried to mask it, but I had raised this boy. I knew every shade of emotion he thought he could hide. "You went to the police?" he said, his voice sharpening. "About the car?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even shift in my seat. "They contacted me. The dealership reported the issue." "What issue?" he demanded. "There's no issue. I told you." "You told me what suited you," I said, calmly but firmly. "But this situation is no longer between just you and me." He ran his hands through his hair and started pacing again, every few steps glancing at me like he was waiting for me to crumble or apologize. But I didn't. "Mom, you can't involve the police in family matters," he snapped. "Do you have any idea how bad this looks for me?" "Yes," I said simply. He stopped pacing. "Then why would you do that?" "Because," I said, meeting his eyes, "you forged my signature, sold my property without consent, and took money that wasn't yours." He blinked rapidly. "I told you, I was settling debts. You don't even know how much I've—" "Then you should have asked," I interrupted softly. "The way a son asks his mother, not the way a thief takes from a stranger." He flinched. For a second, he couldn't speak. I leaned forward just a little. "Mark, I went to the police because I needed to document the truth. Not to punish you, but to protect myself." His breath hitched. "Protect yourself? From me?" The room fell still. Outside, I could hear crickets, the faint rumble of a distant train, and the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Life moving forward. "Yes," I said quietly. "From you." He sank onto the couch across from me, shoulders slumping for the first time in years. He looked older suddenly, tired in a way I hadn't noticed before. Maybe I'd been too busy worrying about myself to see his unraveling. Or maybe he'd been hiding it. "Mom," he whispered, "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Have you ever looked at someone you love and realized that the harm they caused wasn't a single moment, but a pattern, a slow erosion you didn't notice until the shoreline was gone? He rubbed his face with both hands. "I thought I was helping. Lynn thought so too." "Helping," I repeated. "By taking things without asking. By deciding I'm incapable. By rewriting my choices because you didn't like them?" He stared at the carpet. "I didn't think you'd—" "Fight back?" I finished. His silence was all the answer I needed. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The space between us felt heavy, full of years of misunderstandings, unspoken disappointments, and unbalanced responsibilities. I had always been the steady one, the reliable one, the one who picked up pieces quietly. But quiet doesn't mean weak. It never did. Finally, he said, "What happens now?" "I've given my statement," I said. "The dealership has acknowledged the mistake. There will be an official record. What happens next depends on how you choose to move forward." He swallowed hard. Are you pressing charges?" "Not today," I said. "But the documentation stays, and the next decision you make about my life, without me, will not be forgiven so easily." His face crumpled. "Mom, I'm sorry." I nodded. "I hope you are, but I need more than apologies." "What do you need?" he whispered. "I need boundaries," I said. "I need respect, and I need you to understand that I may be aging, but I am not disappearing." Tears welled in his eyes. "I didn't want to lose you," he murmured. "I was just Scared. Then you should have talked to me, I replied gently, not talked over me. For the first time in a long while, he looked at me, not as someone to manage, but as someone to listen to. I'll fix this, he said softly. I hope you do, I answered, but I will not sit quietly and wait for you to decide when I matter. He nodded slowly. I understand. He didn't, but perhaps someday he would. He rose from the couch and walked to his room without another word. The door closed softly behind him, and the house fell quiet again. I leaned back, letting the tension loosen from my shoulders. The lamp cast a warm glow across the room, illuminating the folder on the coffee table, the one with my name on every page. For years, I had thought power was something young people held, something I'd surrendered over time without even noticing. But sitting there in the calm hush of the evening, I felt something different. Power wasn't loud. It wasn't forceful. Sometimes, it was simply a woman reclaiming the right to her own life. I turned off the lamp and let the darkness settle gently around me, knowing, with a certainty I hadn't felt in years, that the story was finally shifting in my direction. The next morning, I woke to the sound of birds outside my window, a soft, steady chirping that felt strangely comforting. I lay there for a moment, letting the light ease into the room, watching the familiar shapes of my dresser and bookshelf appear in the pale dawn. Something inside me felt different. Not lighter exactly, but clearer, like I had finally scrubbed a foggy window clean. I made my way to the kitchen, the floor cool beneath my slippers, and brewed a fresh pot of coffee. The scent filled the house, warm and grounding. I sat at the table with my mug between my hands, thinking of all the mornings I'd spent here, packing lunches for the kids when they were small, paying bills with Frank across from me, writing grocery lists and doctor reminders with neat little check marks. Now, as the steam curled up from my mug, I realized this kitchen belonged to me again. Not to fear, not to guilt, not to anyone's assumptions about what I could or couldn't do. Just me. The phone buzzed, pulling me back. A text from Lynn. Mark told me what's going on. Can we talk today? I stared at her message for a long moment. I loved my daughter. I truly did. But she had a way of speaking as though she were reading from a pamphlet titled, How to Manage Aging Parents. She meant well, but meaning well doesn't soften the sting of being talked to like a patient instead of a person. Still, I agreed to meet her. By early afternoon, I found myself sitting at a cafe near the library, a place I loved because it smelled faintly of old books and cinnamon rolls. The windows were large, and the tables small, inviting conversations that didn't need to be loud. Lynn arrived exactly on time, like she always did. She hugged me a little too tightly, like she wasn't sure I'd be stable enough to stand on my own. Mom, she said, sliding into the seat across from me, I'm really worried. I know, I replied gently. Tell me why. She tucked her hair behind her ear, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. Mark said you went to the police. He said things are complicated. They are, I said. And they're also simple. She exhaled, frustrated. Mom, you've been forgetting things. You've been overwhelmed. We're trying to help. Help, I repeated softly. By making decisions without me? By assuming I can't understand my own life? Her eyes softened, but her voice stayed firm. We see you struggling. We just want to keep you safe. I reached into my purse and placed the printed screenshots and dealership papers on the table beside my coffee. This isn't about safety, I said. This is about boundaries, about respect. You may not see my strength anymore, but I do. Lynn's eyes drifted over the papers. He really signed your name? Yes, I replied calmly. And he took $4,000? Yes. She leaned back, stunned. For a moment, the confident daughter vanished. replaced by the little girl who used to come to me with scraped knees and tears in her eyes, asking for the truth. "Mom," she whispered, I didn't know it was like that." "I know," I said softly. "Because none of you asked. You decided." She blinked hard, swallowing emotion. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I didn't want to be a burden," I said. "Because somewhere along the line, you and your brother convinced yourselves that my value was tied to what I needed instead of who I am." Her eyes shimmered. "That's not true." "Yes, it is," I said gently, "but it doesn't have to stay true." A moment passed between us, quiet, raw, honest. Finally, Lynn reached across the table and took my hand. "What do you want, Mom? What would make you feel safe? Supported?" "I want my independence respected," I said. "And I want to choose when I ask for help, not have it forced on me." She nodded slowly, as though each word was sinking deeper than the last. "I can do that. I'll talk to Mark. He needs to understand." "He needs time," I said. "But yes, understanding must come." We talked for over an hour, about memories, about fears, about the strange shift that happens when children begin to see their parents through the lens of worry rather than admiration. It wasn't a perfect conversation, but it was a true one. When we hugged goodbye, her arms felt different, less protective, more respectful. She let go first. That mattered. On the walk home, I felt the brisk breeze tug at my cardigan, the late afternoon sun warming my shoulders. The world didn't look any different, but I did. Back at the house, I saw an envelope tucked between the front door and the frame, my name written neatly on the front. I opened it inside. "Mrs. Collins, as requested, this letter confirms that the dealership acknowledges the sale of your vehicle was processed without proper verification. We are cooperating with law enforcement and your legal counsel. Sincerely, Tony Harris, Used Auto Sales." For a long moment, I simply stood there, holding the paper, letting the weight of it settle into my bones. Not the weight of worry, no, the weight of truth, of validation, of having done something I once feared I no longer had the strength to do. I placed the letter in my folder and sat down in my recliner with a warm blanket draped across my legs. The house was quiet, but no longer in a lonely way, more in the way a home feels when you've finally reclaimed it. Have you ever felt a moment of peace so full that it almost scared you? That evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned a soft lavender, I realized something profound. I wasn't fighting to get my car back. I was fighting to get myself back. And piece by piece, document by document, boundary by boundary, I was succeeding. The morning after Lynn and I talked, I woke with a quiet steadiness in my chest, the kind that doesn't shout or sparkle, just sits there like a warm stone, reminding you that you're standing on your own feet again. I made oatmeal, watered my ferns by the window, and opened the curtains wide to let in the day. The sky was a gentle gray, the kind that promises rain but not a storm. I'd always liked days like this. They make the world feel softer, more forgiving. My phone buzzed around 10, a message from Officer Ramirez. "Mrs. Collins, the dealership has submitted their formal statement. You're welcome to review it at the precinct any time." Clear, orderly, respectful. 3 words I had been craving without realizing it. I didn't rush. I folded laundry, made myself a turkey sandwich, and took a short walk around the block. Mrs. Patterson waved from her porch, and I waved back, this time with a genuine smile instead of the distracted half-smile I'd been offering the world lately. On my walk home, I thought about my life before everything had gotten so tangled. When Frank was alive, when the kids were still small enough to need me but not old enough to resent needing me. There were bills, responsibilities, and heartaches even then, but also a sense of purpose. That purpose wasn't gone. It had just been buried under other people's assumptions. Back at home, I gathered the folder, my folder, and headed to the precinct. The rideshare driver hummed along to a soft jazz station, and I found myself tapping my fingers against my knee in rhythm. A small, silly movement, but it made me feel oddly alive. At the station, Ramirez greeted me with the kind of smile people use when they've been rooting for you quietly. "Mrs. Collins," he said, offering me a seat at his desk. "The dealership confirmed everything. They're taking responsibility for their part. We've officially recorded that you did not authorize the sale." Relief didn't wash over me in a dramatic wave. It came gently, like warm water trickling down from a faucet. "That means," he continued, "if you choose to take further action with your son, the groundwork is solid, but that decision is yours." There was no push, no judgment, just choice. Choice. That word had become something sacred. "Thank you," I said, "for treating me like someone who still knows her own mind." He nodded. "You do, ma'am, very clearly." I left the precinct with the new statement folded neatly in my purse. I didn't know if I'd ever use it against Mark. Maybe I wouldn't. But having it gave me air in my lungs again. When I arrived home, the house was quiet, sunlight glowing through the lace curtains. Mark's car wasn't in the driveway. That didn't surprise me. He'd been distant the last few days, quiet, cautious, softer around the edges. Maybe he was ashamed. Maybe he was figuring out who he had become. I hoped so. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat on the porch, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. I watched the world go by. The mailman with his familiar shuffle, neighborhood kids biking down the street, a dog chasing a squirrel with joyous futility. Life in motion. Then, unexpectedly, my neighbor's granddaughter, little Samoyed, skip out my walkway. She was carrying a paper grocery bag nearly as big as she was. "Grandma said you might like some extra muffins," she said breathlessly. I laughed, a real laugh that felt new in my mouth. "Did she now?" Emily nodded and held out the bag. "Blueberry. She made too many." "Thank you, sweetheart," I said, ruffling her hair lightly. She skipped away, and I stood there holding warm muffins wrapped in wax paper. Such a small gesture, but kindness often comes in small, unannounced moments. Inside the house, I placed the muffins on the counter and sat again at the table where so much had unfolded these past weeks. I opened the folder, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to see it. Proof, protection, boundaries, pieces of my strength, gathered like stones in a garden path. Have you ever noticed how reclaiming yourself isn't one loud moment, but a series of small ones? A signature compared, a document filed, a conversation spoken with clarity, a no said at the right time. As the afternoon light softened into gold, I closed the folder and rested my hand on top of it. Not out of fear, out of gratitude for the woman I still was, a woman who could be shaken, but not removed from her own life. In that quiet moment, with the scent of blueberry muffins in the air and the world humming gently outside my window, I understood something simple and profound. My fight was no longer about injustice. It was about becoming whole again, and I was nearly there. The house was unusually still the next morning, a soft kind of stillness that felt like it had settled there just for me. I brewed a small pot of coffee and took my cup out to the porch, letting the cool air brush against my cheeks. The sunrise washed the neighborhood in a pale gold, and for the first time in a long while, I felt no weight pressing on my chest. Mark came home mid-morning. I heard his hesitant footsteps before he stepped onto the porch. He looked tired, less defensive, more humbled. He stood there a moment, hands in his pockets, eyes lowered. "Mom," he said quietly, "I've been thinking, and I'm sorry, really sorry. I shouldn't have done any of it." I nodded, not to dismiss him, but to let the moment breathe. "Thank you," I said. "That means something, but we both know sorry doesn't erase everything." "I know," he whispered, "but I want to do better. I want to understand where I went wrong." I gestured to the empty rocking chair beside me. "Sit." He did, not like a man ready to argue, but like a son finally ready to listen. We talked, not about the car, not about the money, but about fear, pride, aging, and the complicated way love can twist itself into control if you're not careful. His voice cracked once, mine only softened. "I promise," he said near the end, "I won't make decisions for you again." And for the first time, I believed him. When he left for work, I sat there a little longer, rocking gently, watching sunlight drift across the lawn. The world felt open again. My future, something I had quietly stopped imagining, stretched out before me like a road I could still walk. Later that afternoon, I visited the community center downtown. They were offering watercolor classes and a weekly book circle. I signed up for both. The young woman behind the desk smiled at my enthusiasm, but she didn't treat me like I was fragile. She asked what colors I liked, what genres I enjoyed. She addressed me like a person, not an age. Walking home, I felt something warm bloom inside me. A small, steady joy I hadn't felt in years. Freedom, maybe, or the simple pride of having stood up for myself after so long staying quiet. When I stepped back into my home, I paused in the doorway. It didn't feel like a place I was fading in. It felt like a place I was beginning again. Have you ever realized that reclaiming your life isn't loud or dramatic? It's a gentle turning, a soft yes to yourself, a steady reminder that you're still here. That evening, as the sun dipped low, I whispered something into the quiet air. "Frank, I think you'd be proud." And for the first time, I felt it might be true. Life isn't always fair. People you love make choices that hurt. But if you stand steady, if you gather your papers, your truth, your voice, you can build a path back to yourself. And that path is worth everything. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you, I'd be grateful if you liked and subscribed. And tell me, if you were in my place, what would you have done?